501. Okay. All right. I guess panelists will and members will start coming in. My name is Sharon Roberson. Can you hear me okay? I'm President and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And today's brown bag is part of the Policy Commission's series in which we bring all of our 3 areas together in order to get information that crosses all lines. For those of you who may not understand what the Policing Commission is doing, we have 3 major focus groups. One is the community interaction, which involves vulnerable populations. One is how police officers are hiring, recruiting, and all those aspects of police officers, and also the training function. So this particular brown bag that deals with interpersonal violence is relevant to all 3 areas. We have to make sure we have police officers that have the emotional intelligence on the front end to be able to accept information about interpersonal violence. We need to have proper training of police officers, and these groups of people will talk to you about the training and the function. But we also have to have a sensitivity of police officers in dealing with or working with these very vulnerable populations. As we know, police officers are the first line, often with those who experience interpersonal violence. So it's very important for all of us to have an understanding of how these particular agencies function. I will say that in 2019, Nashville took a major step in the process of working with individuals experiencing interpersonal violence by opening the doors of the Family Safety Center to victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, and human trafficking. This is operated by the Metro Nashville Government Family Safety Center, and it has been held by the Tennesseans as one of the largest, most comprehensive family justice centers in the United States. We are very proud of this organization. And this brings together both governmental entities as well as nonprofit services in order to address issues of interpersonal violence. Also, as part of this panel, over the last few years, the YWCA and sexual assault centers have partnered with Metro Nashville Police Department to evolve services for victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assaults. Here are our panelists. When each panelist speaks, I will ask them to very briefly describe themselves and their role, and then we'll go from there because we have a lot of information to deliver to you and it's very important. Diane Lance is the Director of Office of Family Safety. As I said before, my name is Sharon Roberson. I'm the President and CEO of the YWCA. I'm also a member of the Policing Commission and the Vice Chair of the Communities Committee. Rachel Friedman, President and CEO of the Sexual Assault Center. Sergeant Carlos Anderson with the Metro Nashville Police Department, and Janice Williams, who's also with the Metro Nashville Police Department as a licensed social worker. And so we'll start with Diane, and she'll go through and talk to you about the very important Family Safety Center.
Great, thank you, Sharon, and I really appreciate the commission inviting us here. So, Michael, I just want to make sure you're on mute too, because we're getting a lot of feedback and I'm not sure if it's coming from your computer, but Sharon's going to give, everyone's going to give their own brief overview so we can go to the next slide. Michael? Yep. So mainly what we're going to work on today in these presentations is we're going to focus on 3 primary objectives. One is learn what domestic violence looks like in Nashville and the impact on victims, children, and the community. We want to learn about the risk to victims, the community, and officers that respond, and learn about Nashville's nationally recognized prevention and victim support programs. Next. We have an Office of Family Safety, and I sort of want to show you what that looks like in our government. As you can see from this slide, our office is in the yellow below. And so Metro has a lot of departments like water and police, parks, and we have an Office of Family Safety as a standalone department in our government. And that's a new thing. And it's not only new to Nashville, we're the only city in the country that has an office focusing on interpersonal violence victim safety and offender accountability. And it is a model and a standard that people from around the country come to call or come into our city to learn more about. So it's something we can all be really proud of. Next slide. This slide talks about when men murder women, looking at that rate, 93% of those were killed by someone they know when a man murders a woman. 1 in 6 murders in Tennessee involve domestic violence. Domestic violence homicides are the most preventable homicides, and that's why we do the work that we do. They account for 15% of Nashville's overall homicide rate. Domestic violence homicides are preventable. There are always warning signs. There's a history. There are known red flags. And that's what you're going to hear a lot about in this presentation. And that's why our office and the others speaking today, our amazing partners, focus a lot of our day-to-day effort on those warning signs, on that history, and on the known red flags that a victim may be killed or seriously injured by their offender. Next slide. The good news is here in Nashville, we are considered a national model in terms of how we work in a coordinated fashion around victim safety. As I said, we are the only city with a governmental department focusing on interpersonal violence, and our office runs the 2 family safety centers that Sharon described. This slide that we just advanced to, the Gene Crow Advocacy Center, we are one of only a handful in the country of cities that have a court-based family safety center, and this is what ours has looked like. So victims have a safe and comforting place to wait for court and to speak with and get help from an advocate and talk to their assistant district attorney. Next slide. In addition to our court center, we also have the largest and most comprehensive family safety center out in our community. This center opened in March of 2019. We're really, really proud of it, and we all should be proud of it as a city. The next slide, please. Tennessee is currently ranked 5th in the country for the rate at which men murder women. The majority of these murders are by intimate partners. For the 22 years that these types of numbers that you see on this slide have been analyzed by the Violence Policy Center, Tennessee has been in the top 10 for 18 out of 22 years. When we're not on the top 10, Tennessee has remained in the top 20 in the country. Violence against women is an epidemic in Tennessee that we have to address with constant vigilance, prevention, and innovative work. That's really what you're going to be hearing about, all that type of work we're doing here in Nashville. Next slide, please. As you can see, in Nashville and across the country, domestic violence homicides are on the rise. This slide shows Nashville's DV homicide rate from 2010 to 2019. Just last year, we had a peak at 15. 20% of the individuals murdered were 18 years and under. That includes an 18-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 6-year-old. 67% last year were murdered by their intimate partner. 73% of victims were women. 2% of the incidents were familicides, where the perpetrator killed their intimate partner, as well as children or grandchildren in the home. You'll hear more about that later. 4 of the incidents were murder-suicides, where the offender killed another and then themselves. Next, the rate of familicide in Nashville is on the rise. I'm sorry, we're on the one after that. I thought we were already on that slide. So the next slide, Michael. The rate of familicide in Nashville is on the rise. From 2012 to 2016, there were no domestic violence child homicides. Oh, please press it again so the words come up. Keep going, thank you. Sadly, each year we have had 2 homicides that have involved children in a domestic violence situation. When we think about high-risk domestic violence, we have to understand that's not just the intimate partner who's at risk, but the whole family unit, including children and other relatives. Next. Last year in Nashville, I really want to stop for just a minute and give a warning. I thought I had this in here to say that this information can be really tough if anyone has a past experiences with domestic violence with themselves and a family member. So please, if you are being triggered or feeling overwhelmed by this information, feel free to just stop your audio for a little bit or stop looking at the screen, and we all understand. but make sure to take care of yourself as I go through this material. It's tough to hear. Just last year in Nashville, the mother in this photograph and child were killed. The abuser was a convicted felon from Alabama. Ms. Garcia made a domestic violence report to the police and took out an order of protection on October 1st, 2019. The offender made bond, and 6 days after his arrest, he broke into the home, stabbing her 13-year-old son, and 16-year-old daughter. The 16-year-old daughter did survive her stab wounds, fortunately, but Ms. Garcia and her son did not. And again, this was a case just 2 years ago. Next slide, please. The 16-year-old's description of the incident is on this slide. I'm not going to read it to you, but this was an absolute tragedy. And we have tragedies like this in Nashville. Again, 15% of our homicides are domestic violence ones. This tragedy, however, would have been much worse if it had not been for the fact that we had so many amazing professionals located in the same building, including police and the police counselors. Because we were all together, we were able to devise and deploy an effective plan to support the 2 surviving children in this family with their immediate trauma and placement needs. So it's really a sad story, but a success story in the aftermath for the surviving children. Next slide. In addition to domestic violence, child-related homicides, domestic violence, murder, suicides are also on the rise, not just in Nashville, but across the country. Often with murder-suicides, if there are children in the home, they will end up being killed as well. Abusers often will kill the mother, so she must watch, and then, will kill the children first, having the mother watch, and then kill themselves last. It's tragic, and we are hearing it again from all over the country that these homicides involving children and murder-suicides are on the rise. Very concerned with, next slide, with the impact of COVID, because domestic violence victims and their children are often not safer at home. Here you can see a sharp increase during the height of stay-at-home orders compared with the same time for previous years. Next slide. The staying at home, the need to stay at home due to the virus heightens the power and control that offenders have over their family members. This control is heightened for the obvious reasons. One, there's more isolation from people that can help, friends, coworkers, family, and difficulty leaving the home unnoticed to get the help that you need. Added stressors in the house compound the problem, such as children home from school, job loss, economic stress. In Nashville, and again, across the country, we are seeing a rise in the severity of domestic violence. The abuse is more frequent and more brutal. Next slide. Domestic violence accounts for nearly 50% of all crimes against a person reported to police. And again, 15 to 25% are DV homicides compared to the rest of the homicides. Next slides. I just wanted to give you each a little bit, people often in presentations, they will find the worst scenarios and put them forth on the presentation. I went and just grabbed 28, we had 28 OP orders of protection that we helped with last week. And I pulled sentences from those orders of protection. I was strangled almost unconsciousness in front of our son. He beat me severely and threatened to shoot me. He ran my child's head into a car, causing injuries that needed medical attention in the hospital. He punched me in the mouth. I'm 8 months pregnant. He attempted to hit me with a car. He threatened multiple times to shoot me. He strangled me multiple times to unconsciousness, and I am pregnant. He threatened to gut me and give me an at-home abortion. He was driven erratically on purpose with threats to kill me and himself. He punched me in the face, breaking the bone above my eye. He grabbed me by the neck. I felt dizzy. He strangled me, left scratches on my face. He punched me in the face. He pushed me down in a parking lot. I hit the concrete, and he strangled me once I got back in the car. He was yelling with the kids asleep, "If you leave, I will kill you." She got extremely angry and started threatening everyone in the house, saying she was going to kill everybody. He pulled my hair and tried to strangle me, put bruises on my arm, marks on my neck. Today, she attempted to contact me 55 times and made threats to run over my dog and my current girlfriend. I feel like I'm being poisoned. I have burns in my mouth I think are coming from my food and things I drink from the home. He has threatened to share inappropriate pictures of me unless I give him money. He hit me in the head with a beer bottle, busted my lip, and flattened my tires. Really, in reading this to you, again, the last 28 OPs, orders of protection that we did last week, that's what they were. So, you know, there are lots of images you get of what domestic violence looks like, but when people come out and they ask for the police help or a counselor's help or an advocate's help, that's what's walking through the door, and that's what we're working with each and every day. Next slide, please. Any of these behaviors present in an IP relationship increases the chance of the perpetrator inflicting serious or deadly harm. And you heard a lot of these words in what, I'm sorry, go on to the next one, please. Yeah, keep going so the words come up. Thank you. So high risk is determined in 3 ways. We look at the lethality assessment, which I'll describe, the danger lethality assessments used by law enforcement, the danger assessment used by advocates and other community service providers, and referrals from partners. And this is just a summary of the risks. And I know when you were listening to me describe those orders of protections, you heard strangulation, threats to kill, weapons, and things like that. So you already heard some real red flags that we worked with last week. The next slide, please. One area I want to touch on is risk to officers. So we're going to talk about high risk to victims, but first also want to talk about risk to officers. The Department of Justice and IACPs list domestic disturbance calls as the most lethal for police officers. For this reason, police departments across the country have very strict protocols in place for these types of calls that emphasize the importance of having more than one officer. It's often mandated. It is here in Nashville. Regulations about how you approach the home, learning what you are walking into, knowing the history, if there's an order of protection, immediately separating the parties, determining primary aggressor, transporting the victim to shelter or to get an order of protection, assessing the need for medical attention, communicating with children at the scene, investigating the crime, and connecting the victim to services. So it is, again, the highest risk for police officers, but also it's very complex when they do arrive. Next slide, please. Moving on from officer risk, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about victim risk. This is an important topic because not all domestic violence situations have the same level of risk. So I'm going to highlight some of the ways that we figure out what level of risk a victim is at. Next slide. So one tool that police use is the lethality assessment, and they use that in coordination with the YWCA, which is the agency that Sharon runs, who introduced this program now just a few minutes ago. When police arrive on the scene of an intimate partner domestic violence case, they sit down with victims just like you see in this picture and ask them 11 evidence-based questions that will determine the level of risk that victim is for being killed or seriously injured. Questions include around strangulation, firearms, threats to kill children, things like that. If the victim does not screen in as high risk, the police officer talks to them about counseling, getting an order of protection, prosecution, and offers to transport them to shelter. If the victim does screen in as high risk, the officer will encourage the victim to get on the phone right then and there. The officer will make the call on their cell phone and connect them to an advocate at the YWCA crisis hotline. And then that victim right then and there is getting crisis intervention services from someone who will talk to them about risk and safety. Every patrol officer does this protocol for every intimate partner domestic violence case. Next slide. When the victim is on the phone with the YWCA, they work again on safety planning, making sure the victim understands their level of risk and encouraging that victim to come to shelter. And the YWCA prioritizes victims who have high risk under the LAP to come into shelter. 24 hours later, the YWCA follows up with each of these victims and offers resources, again, shelter, and checks in on how they're doing. Our department then reviews each one of those and determines which are the highest of high risk to be reviewed by a high risk intervention panel that I'll talk about more later. Next slide. This is a compilation of pictures from the YWCA shelter and Weaver Center. So it's just a beautiful place, and often we just need to show people what the Weaver Center looks like, for it to feel safer for victims to come, and they realize it really is a beautiful thing. It's the largest shelter in the state of Tennessee, and it's something we in Nashville should be very, very proud of, and Sharon does such a great job running that whole program and many others. The next two slides, we can just sort of jot through them. Is what the LAP looks like. These are the questions. Michael, you can advance to the next slide. These are the questions that were asked on the LAP. And as you can see, 54% of people answer that they have been strangled in the past, that their offender has controlling behaviors, that they think their offender might kill them or their children. Next slide. 55% have had past separations from their offender, and the offender has spied or threatened them in some way. Those are just some highlights off of that. Just want to point out that leaving an offender is absolutely one of the highest risk times for victims of domestic violence. It's one of the reasons it's so hard to do. The next slide. In addition to the LAP, advocates across the city use a more extensive questionnaire called the Danger Assessment. Some of the information we get off of looking at those is 61% of victims say their offender stalks them, 44% have been strangled by their offender, 48% of those lost consciousness during those strangulations. Next slide. So this is, okay, leave it right here, Michael. I'm gonna have to, I'll tell you, okay, then you got it. So this is how I'm going to describe the lethality assessment and why it's important. So this is an actual case that happened here in Nashville. This big circle you see here is when police respond to a car vandalization that her boyfriend, I can't remember if it was a boyfriend or spouse, I think it was a boyfriend, had vandalized her car. So next slide, Michael. So then shortly after that, this is what we see. He followed her home from work while texting threats. He followed her home and killed her. It seems like a really big progression from vandalism to murder. And that's what it used to look like to us. We would only see what the police were called for, not the history of abuse as the victim is telling us what's been going on prior to that call. The call is a tipping point where they're like, I can't take it. I think he might kill me. It's too much. And they pick up the phone, but there's always a whole history before that. Next slide, Michael. So with an LAP, if those 11 questions were asked in this case, this is everything we would have learned about what happened before that vandalism. And everything in red are red flags, and she would have been marked as high risk. And given the services that come along with being indicated as high risk, threats to kill her and the children, displaying a gun, and strangled her to the point of unconsciousness. So now it doesn't look so odd that he killed her. It's obviously horribly wrong, but there were serious warning signs before that vandalism that we would have known that she was at high risk. Next slide, of being killed or seriously injured. And so hopefully it's our hope. Nope, back one, Michael. So hopefully when you have the LAP, you prevent the homicide altogether, and services are injected at the vandalism point. Next slide. Ladies, I'm trying to go fast, I promise you. Multidisciplinary response. We work together as a team. All the people you see up here that will be speaking, we've been working together for years now. We work as teams to try to help all these highest risk victims. I'm going to start with the next slide, which is our high risk intervention panel. This is a way we all come together as a team and respond to the highest of high risk victims. Next slide. These are all the partners that do this. They meet each week and review every single highest of high risk cases and figure out how to respond to that victim's risk and hold that offender accountable. I always say, to respond to the offender faster than the offender is escalating against the victim. And you can see the police are highly involved in this team and help lead it with us. Next slide. So strangulation is the next area of focus that we focus on high-risk victims. You've been hearing that word a lot. And we have a team around that. Victims who have been strangled are 7.5 times more likely to be killed by their offender. That's one of the reasons we focus on it. Next slide. These are all of our partners that we work with on a monthly basis to improve how our city responds to strangulation cases. You can see hospitals are involved in this partnership as well as the fire department with their EMTs. The next slide. Strangulation is so risky that there's even a Strangulation Institute in San Diego, California. What's clear is that the most dangerous domestic violence offenders strangle their victims. The most violent rapists will strangle their victims. And there's a quote from the head of that institute. Next slide. It's been shocking to us as we've been focusing on strangulation, how often victims are strangled. 50% in Nashville of interpersonal violence victims, thank you, you can do the next one too, have been strangled in the past. All right, next slide. Next, just get the material, just go ahead and get it all to come up. Here are some of what you see that those strangulations look like. Most are with the hands. 35% during a sexual assault, 70% thought they were going to die, 38% lost consciousness. Next slide. Stranglers often find strangling as the ultimate tool of power and control. And this quote from a survivor really says it better than I could ever say it. Just how much power you have when someone's, when there is a strangulation, how much power is taken away from you. Next slide, we can just go between the two. This next two slides are from the Strangulation Institute. We use this every day in our work with victims to really try to pay attention to where injuries might be, keeping in mind not all injuries can be seen. Next slide. And this is a group that we sent to San Diego to become experts in strangulation. And this team includes, as always, police, prosecutors, our hospital partners, EMTs, and 911 call takers. So it was a week of very hard work, but we got it done, and we are training people across the city on strangulation and working really together as a unit. Next slide. And this is great. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is firearms, which increases the risk that a domestic violence victim will be killed by 5 times. Past just having one in the home, past threats or assault with a firearm increases the risk that a domestic violence victim will be killed by 20 times. So either way, it's very risky if you're a domestic violence victim for there to be a firearm in the home with your offender. Next slide. These are the partnerships in that firearm task force. Again, police is a very important partner in this, as well as our nonprofit partners. Next slide. And also that abusers who have a firearm are the ones that inflict the most serious type of abuse. Next slide. These are just some more numbers you can have on firearms. I know that you will probably get a copy of this PowerPoint, so I won't account for all of it, but I do want to mention the next slide, which, with like so many things, what is hard on women generally is even harder for Black women, which are twice as likely to be fatally shot by an intimate partner as compared to white women. Next slide. Mass shootings. Unexpected topic in domestic violence, except for those that work in this area. Mass shootings are related to domestic violence at a rate of 54%. Next slide. Mass shooting, this is just sort of a general rundown of what's involved with the mass shootings, where they occur. The next slide shows that how many children are involved in mass shootings. Again, almost so often domestic violence related. And then the next slide is an example of a recent mass shooting from 2 years ago, where the perpetrator shot his stepmother in the house. She survived, went outside, and then executed her 2 daughters, which were his stepsisters, aged 5 and 8, while they were playing in the snow. Carjacked 2 men, shooting them both and killing one. That's a mass shooting. And that is when I say they're often domestic violence related, that's what I mean. And again, that happened 2 years ago here in Nashville. Next slide. Another team we are focusing on, and I won't go much into sexual assault because Rachel will, but it all doubles the domestic violence risk of being killed if there's a history of being sexually assaulted too. The next slide. Pregnancy does not stop the violence. Next slide. Here are some statements that victims have given us in the past few months who have been pregnant about the abuse. Next slide, about the abuse they've received. And next slide. It shouldn't be surprising. It would make no sense that the violence stops at the bedroom door. It doesn't stop at the bedroom door. And that's what we learned from our victims. It's just they don't always disclose. So 68% of domestic violence victims experience sexual violence, but it has an 80% non-report rate. And then there below are some numbers for our office. 23% of our clients that take the danger assessment say they've been sexually assaulted by their partner. And next slide shows our sexual assault task force, which is a really wonderful compilation again of our partners, including police and nonprofits and other metro agencies. So I want to just go quickly and be real fast through the slides to show you what our family safety centers look like, because they're unbelievable. And we all work together in this. Police, nonprofits, some state agencies, we all come together to serve victims in a trauma-informed manner in this building. So I'm going to just, Michael, we're going to click through fast. This is the outside of the building. It's located at 610 Murfreesboro Pike. It's open 24/7. Next shows our welcoming entrance where we have the languages spoken in our city here on our welcome wall. Next, this is the main area for clients. As you can see, it's beautiful, it's inviting, and most importantly, it has so much dignity with it. Next, this is the other end of the living room as well, and you can see a beautiful play area in the back. Next, we have private support rooms where you go in and sit with an advocate and work through everything you need to work through, or have a counseling session and really try to address the needs that people present to us. Next, this is our play pyramid where children don't have to sit in the room and hear and recount everything that happened. They can have some great trauma-informed play and feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure, which is so important for children who live with chronic trauma and abuse. Next slide. We do have a clinic, and it is used right now some by a trafficking program that we have, and we're working on bringing in partners to utilize that for strangulation evaluations and forensic documentation of injuries. Next, lots of collaborative space, the next two slides, for all of us to work together. And then we have a whole nonprofit located with us. Next slide. We can just sort of click through the rest of the pictures, Michael. And this is where children who are sexually and severely physically abused come in to be interviewed about their abuse and also receive counseling. And that's all here in this building too. This picture shows what it looks like for child counseling, and our police department has amazing counselors. They're the only counselors in the building. We have advocates and they have amazing counselors. And this is what counseling stuff looks like in a counseling office. I'm sure there's a better way to say that than I just did, but next slide. And then just again, want to remind you that leaving can be deadly. It's the highest risk time for victims. Next slide. And also just to say that doing this work is very traumatic. Advocates and counselors are swamped in vicarious trauma each day, but so are the officers that respond to these calls. And remember, domestic violence accounts for nearly half of all the violent crime in this city, half of it. Because the work's so hard, we focus on a lot of self-care. And this is an officer that came in on a very rough case with lots of children. And he just stopped and took some time with our support dog in the building, Polly, and had a moment with that. And it was just such a great thing to see an officer take that time for himself after dealing with what he had just dealt with. And the last slide I want to end with just breaks down the numbers for all the help that all our partners gave to victims of interpersonal violence in the Family Safety Center. It's truly been, and if you build it, they will come. The numbers have far exceeded what we planned and expected, but because we have such strong partnerships, we've been able to meet the demand for services. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Diane. And so I hope that the takeaway for everyone on this call is really to appreciate the collaboration of the Office of Family Safety with not only the police department, but other nonprofits is very, very important because at some point in your lives in Nashville, you'll be asked by a victim of violence, of interpersonal violence, what do I do? This I call our one-stop shop. They can help you. If they cannot answer for you, they can get you to the person that you need to have the answer. And so many people are not aware of the services. So thank you, Diane, for really what was a great overview. Now I'm going to ask Michael to put up the slide presentation for the Metro Nashville Police Department Domestic Violence Division Family Intervention Program. And we have Sergeant Carlos Anderson, as well as Janiska Williams of the Metro Nashville Police Department. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think there's some technical problems, so I'm not sure if he'll be able to participate.
Okay, we'll move forward.
Carlos, are you there? Okay, so I'm assuming he would be covering the part from the police departments with the domestic violence division and the police officers function, but he is not going to be available. But I can, if you can go with the slides about the family intervention program, that is our counseling program with the police department. So that would be, I can talk a little bit, I guess, about the domestic violence division with the police department. And since he put up the slides here, we have, it was established in 1994. Right now, our staff is 1 captain, 1 lieutenant, 21 detectives, 7 part-time employees, 4 administrators assistants, 2 civilian supervisors, and we have 8 counselors and 5 advocates. The good thing about our domestic violence division is that we not only service investigative cases, we also have a counseling division that we provide counseling services and crisis intervention to victims of domestic violence. The program was created with the idea that anyone who suffers trauma or multiple traumas as a result of a criminal act should be offered free crisis intervention and follow-up counseling. So that's something that is being nationally recognized from the police departments. So if you can go to the next slide. And I'm kind of going over a little bit with what the sergeant was going to discuss, but this is more his presentation. If we can move to the, okay. Can you all see the presentation or? Okay.
Yes.
This is kind of our purpose of the domestic violence, and is to provide domestic violence reduction and awareness products to all persons affected by domestic violence. And this is completed so that victims can lessen the risk of becoming victims of domestic violence. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm just gonna really go quick through the slides. And again, Diane brought some good examples of the reality of which these families are living. And this is something that we also need to understand what is the situation of a victim in this type of homes and how traumatized and how much that affects their life. It affects everybody within the family. So it is a crime also, and this is the Tennessee statute when it comes to domestic violence. And we want to also enforce the law and make sure that these victims are protected, because one of the key things about our work is to make sure that they are safe and that we offer options for them to be safe and protected. And that's one of the things that our detectives do. And these are specialized officers, detective in the unit, that are able to investigate these cases. And it's a community effort because we all come together in helping victims. We couldn't do it ourselves. We need to have these collaboration efforts in order for us to be able to provide a better service for victims. So just wanted to share the statute. So it is a crime as you all know. If we can move to the other slides. And we can skip that. I think Diane talked a little bit about this, so we can go over that. I'm not sure. And guys, we're probably going to have the domestic violence division come back and talk about this. This is some of the statistics of, we went back, we went too far. Okay, and these are some of the domestic violence statistics and cases that the police department handle on a year basis. It's up to 26,000 cases. So far, we have received an estimate of 17,500 cases. And DV homicides in Davidson County, we have 10 so far this year. So 25% of the Metro Nashville police incidents are domestic violence related. So the sergeants, how usually police officers go out to the scenes, they file a police report. If there is enough probable cause, they'll make an arrest, they'll offer orders of protection. They will offer victims options of shelter and counseling also. That's one of the criteria for police officers when they go out to the scene, that they have to offer those services. And every domestic violence report goes to our domestic violence division. And depending on the severity of the case, it will be reviewed and it would be assigned to a detective to follow up with it. At the same time, the case will also be looked at by a counselor supervisor, and that counselor supervisor will assign that case to one of the counselors. And our job is really to offer them services and reach out to the victims. It's a great service because it's free counseling services, and we're all licensed counselors, which services are so limited in many ways for victims because not only they're living in an abusive situation, not only they've been physically abused, but there's also that financial barrier that is there in this type of relationship. So many of them are just, it's like a new beginning of their life. So they don't have the means to get information and get help when it comes to the psychological aspect of it too. So it's really resourceful for us to be there and be part of this service in helping the community with their mental health and their stability of life. If we can go to the next slide. And we went, if you can go through. And again, I guess I'm going to go all the way through. I kind of explain a little bit of how we function and work, and and Diane, so we can move over with this.
Just tell me when to stop.
Yeah, go on, please. Because I think Diane has touched on those things too, which we all team up and we all work together as a team, even though we're in different agencies in the Metro government. Okay, go back. I'm sorry, go back to a couple of slices. There you go. Let's talk a little bit about that. This is yeah, go forward. Thank you, and thank you for bearing with me about this presentation. Handle with Care, this is a program that was created. It came out from the Domestic Violence Division, but now the Youth Services Department has kind of adopted the program. And this is a way of helping victims when a child has been exposed to any traumatic event or any crime. There's a counselor that gets assigned to this case, and that counselor will particularly have, will reach out to the school and the faculty and kind of let the school know that there has been a traumatic experience, that this child has been exposed, in order for them to provide a sense of care and concern for the child. So this is a great program too, but it's because it's bringing up some care to that child within the school. Sometimes kids go through a traumatic experience, they go to the school and nobody knows what's going on with their life. Sometimes it reflects on their behavior. And sometimes it's good for them to kind of know in order to give them an idea of how to address them and how to help them in the process. Some of them in the school, they just hear it in the news what's happening. And it's really difficult for them to really approach a child through this situation. So it kind of gives a sense of really getting an idea of, this is what's going on, this is what's happening with the child, and how we can intervene and help in this delicate situation of life. So it's really helping the students, and it's really helping the family to work through overcoming this situation. So the next slide, please. And here is our actual program. It used to be the Domestic Violence Division Counseling Session and the Victim Intervention Program, but a couple of years ago, we merged and we created what the program is, the Family Intervention Program. And we have counselors, licensed counselors that what we do is follow up with victims and call them, offer them services, but at the same time, we offer counseling services where we do a lot of other things. Sometimes victims call, they want counseling, but they are having some basic needs, like they don't have any food, they don't have any other situations that they're going through, and we are able to connect them with all those services. We have advocates also in our office that help with all these needs that the victim have, basic needs that they will have, court support also, guidance through the court. Diane's group, we work together because, again, we all team up in helping with needs that the victims have. And we focus also on the trauma and how to help them overcome and have a better life based on helping them with trauma information and all the things that they need to overcome this life experience. If we can move to the next slide.
And Janice, I hate to interrupt you, but Michael, will these slides and this information be available to this group after the call? Because I do want to make sure we have time for Q&A and to be able to speak. Are these going to be available?
I believe the appropriate people might be able to send them out to you. I can see if I can share the files within the meeting for you to download them.
Okay, this is fabulous information. Just really love it. I just want to make sure we have time for Rachel and maybe take one or two questions.
Yes, and thank you so much. I think I cover a lot, but if the PowerPoint can be provided, that would be great. And again, I apologize. There were some tech problems that our sergeant was not able to participate, but I'm hoping that I cover some of the information that you all needed, and I'll be glad to also answer questions right after. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this is really, really important information because this is one of the programs, especially the Handle with Care program and all the family intervention. These are really some of the success stories that we have to make sure that when we're mapping out how we go forward in selecting what will be the next policing model for Nashville, that we do not lose some of these wonderful programs that already exist. And so now I'll let Rachel Friedman, President and CEO of the Sexual Assault Center.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Glad to be with you all. Michael, I'm not sure if you can pull up my slides. And I know we're short on time, so I'll try and fly through things as much as possible. Michael, do you think the slides can go up?
Yeah, just give us a minute. I've got another person from ITS in here, and we're working on something. Just be patient. Give us like 15 seconds, okay?
Sure. Well, I can go ahead and get started, and we can just advance through the slides more quickly. So the first thing I wanted to do is just paint a big, broad overview of what sexual assault is, and just to paint a picture we're talking about and why. Sexual assault, according to the work that we do within our community, is any non-consensual act, including when a victim lacks ability or capacity to consent. Sexual assault can include rape, aggravated rape, statutory rape, sexual battery, aggravated sexual battery. And as you've heard Diane and others speak already today, it's also can be part of intimate partner violence. It can happen through incest relationships, drug-facilitated sexual assault, and child sexual abuse. So sexual assault is a big umbrella term that pulls all of those different sexual assault acts under it. The Sexual Assault Center has been in Nashville in Middle Tennessee since 1978. So we've been around for 42 years, and we've worked with about 27,000 individuals who have survived sexual assault. About 60% of the people we serve are adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and about 40% of the people we serve are children. And of the 60% of adults, there are adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse and adult rape survivors, and then 40% are children. So we primarily provide individual and group counseling, and you can go one more slide, or two more slides through, Michael, when you get a chance. Perfect. So we've served 27,000 people since we've opened our doors, but in this last year alone, in 2019 calendar year, we worked with just over 1,100 individuals. 85% of them were female and 15% were male. And that is, as you would assume, most victims who come forward are female, and it does still happen to men. We are seeing a growing number of men coming forward seeking services, which is a good thing. We know that sexual abuse is very taboo and often stigmatized, and it's very difficult to come forward, and it's even more difficult for men. So we want to see those numbers continue to grow, because it's not that it's not happening to men, it's often more difficult to come forward and seek help. Sexual assault happens to 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys before their 18th birthday nationwide, and 1 in 6 women experience rape or attempted rape, and 1 out of every 10 rape victims is a male. So this is a very prevalent problem. Nashville is no exception to that. Michael, you can go to the next. We do individual and group counseling, and this the previous picture was just an example of the nurturing and comfortable space that we provide. But in addition to the counseling and advocacy, and you can go on again, counseling, group therapy, advocacy, we also have a SAFE clinic, a sexual assault forensic exam clinic, and that is the primary way that we partner with MNPD, the Family Safety Center, and several other community partners. Nashville General Hospital is one of the primary partners in this venture that started 2 years ago. We also operate a statewide crisis line. It's Tennessee's first sexual assault line, and it went live in July of this year. And it meets all of the PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act requirements that allow our correctional facilities across the state to be PREA compliant. And then we also have training team, prevention, and outreach departments so that we can work to end this violence and not just respond to it. You can go on, Michael. The SAFE Clinic, like I mentioned, is the primary way that we partner with MNPD and Nashville General Hospital. We created the first standalone non-hospital setting for rape victims to get a rape exam. And we did this in partnership with, again, the Family Safety Center, Our Kids, Vanderbilt, Nashville General Hospital, and several other community organizations and partners. And we did this because most rape victims don't need the care of a hospital emergency room. And since we have been in Nashville for 42 years providing services exclusively to sexual assault victims and survivors, it only made sense that our center also offer the exams in partnership with the nurse practitioners, the sexual assault nurse examiners who have been doing this work for so long. So the Nashville General sexual assault nurse examiners come to our clinic and provide these exams. You can go on, Michael. We have been open for exactly 2 years. We opened in September of 2018. So our first full calendar year of operation was in 2019, and we served 185 victims. And that was about 85 more people than we expected to serve. We anticipated serving about 100 people during our first year of operation. And go on, please. So of the 185 people who came in, it is really interesting to look at why they came in. and 72% of the people who came to the SAFE clinic were sexually assaulted by somebody they know. That's really important for us to know because that impacts why people report and why people don't report, and it also impacts investigations and the recovery process from sexual assault, because 72% of people who came to the clinic were assaulted by somebody they know, which means there is a lot that goes into play in recovering from this. And it's not just that somebody has been victimized in such an intimate and personal way, but they've experienced it by somebody who they've had a trusting relationship with typically. And that requires a significant recovery process and impacts people, the trauma, significant trauma that occurs through that. Most people were sexually assaulted by an acquaintance, but also intimate partners and family members. And then only 28% were sexually abused by a stranger. And this is pretty much in keeping with national statistics as well. And you can go on, Michael. Of the people who came into the clinic this past year, 179 of them received an exam, and only 38 of them filed an anonymous kit, which means most of them participated immediately with the criminal justice process and chose to move forward with that. Go on. The other great thing that has happened in our community recently is not only does the SAFE Clinic exist through the strong partnerships that we have, but now victims and survivors have 4 places to go. Up until 2 years ago, there was only one place a victim could go in our community to get a rape exam. Nashville General Hospital has been the place providing these exams for decades, and they have done an excellent job providing the exams, but they've been the only place that you can go. Historically, they've provided somewhere between 200 and 260 exams each year, and this past year, our city provided 377 exams through the 4 locations that are now providing this service. Nashville General Hospital provided 134, Vanderbilt provided 41, Skyline provided 23, and the SAFE Clinic provided 179. There are at least one other hospital, if not 2, who are expanding this service and will begin offering exams in the near future as well. So we are providing more exams. It's not that rape and sexual assault is happening more in our community, but more people are coming forward because services are becoming more accessible. Next slide. According to Metro Nashville Police Department statistics, there were a total of 524 sex crimes reports during the same time period that I've mentioned. 185 people came into the SAFE Clinic and 377 people got exams across our city. Of the 524 people who reported sexual assault to law enforcement, the vast majority were female and about 12% were male. Next slide. Of the 524 reports, there were 22 warrants filed, 22 warrants served, and 22 offenders arrested. Again, of the 524 reports made, 22 offenders were arrested. Okay, we can go on now. Current practice is that MNPD has a dedicated sex crime section. This is an incredible team of detectives that work long and hard to make sure that sexual assault victims and survivors are able to participate in the criminal justice system in a way that allows them to connect with somebody who understands sexual assault nuances and dynamics. The Sex Crimes Unit is an incredible group of people, and they are part of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Police Department. However, when a victim chooses to file a police report or go somewhere to get a rape exam, typically the initial interview is first conducted by a patrol officer, and then they are connected with a Sex Crimes Unit detective after that. Next slide, please. According to the data that was received recently by this commission, the post requirement for training is 1 hour of child sexual abuse training at the very beginning, and then required in-service training for sexual harassment prevention is supposed to occur at least every 4 years, and it happened in 2017 and 2019. And then in addition to that, the Adult Sex Crimes Division provides a 2-hour block of instruction to all new recruits about investigating sexual assaults. So that is what we have been given as a commission on the training that occurs for law enforcement officers in regards to sexual assault investigations. And this is adult sexual assaults, and we're not talking about child sexual abuse in this presentation right now. In Violence Against Women International is an organization that we look to for best practices, and they recommend that a manageable caseload for sex crimes is 72 to 96 cases per year. According to the Sex Crimes Division, the detectives assigned to this department are assigned well above that number. Next slide. Things have changed drastically in 3 to 4 years in regards to how our community has begun working together to respond to sexual assault. The sexual assault has kind of followed on the heels of domestic violence, and the teams that you've heard talk today have paved the way for those of us in the sexual violence work to continue to figure out how to work in partnership to better serve victims and survivors and hold offenders accountable. So we have great models and great leaders from the people that you've heard from already today. But just in the last couple of years, what we've been able to do as a city is provide advocates to any victim who comes to the Safe Clinic or to one of the hospitals to receive a forensic exam. And the benefit of an advocate is they can help navigate the criminal justice process, help explain the benefits of reporting, and connect them to community resources. One of the things that victims can also learn in that process is that you can still receive a rape exam prior to or without filing a police report. We want every victim to file a police report, but we want them to have the time to make that decision and not have to choose that in the moment of getting an exam. We want everybody to get an exam and then be able to make that decision. And then we legislation passed recently that allows for victims to file an anonymous report if they don't want to file a police report right away, but they want the evidence collected. That can be done anonymously. And in the last couple of years, we've begun offering exams to males as well, which is a best practice that should happen. Males are sexually abused too and have every right to receive an exam, and now our city is able to do that. And Davidson County has an active sexual assault response team. For those of you with teams like this, we've had SIPIT teams and child protective investigative teams and teams within domestic violence work for quite some time, and we now have a sexual assault response team, and that engages the Sexual Assault Center, MNPD, the area hospitals that provide the exams, the Family Safety Center, the District Attorney's Office, and it's really a way to review what's happening in regards to sexual assault response and make sure we celebrate the positives and review the challenges so that we can constantly improve. So sexual assault is underreported and underprosecuted, as the data shows. And one of the things that we want to continue to discuss and look forward to is promoting changes that can improve policies and practices that will increase victim cooperation with law enforcement and the criminal justice process. We also hope that that will allow for increased collaboration with law enforcement partners and the greater community. And then ultimately that will decrease incidents of sexual violence and the long-term negative impact on victims, families, and the greater community. So for those reasons, that's why continued improvement in policy practices and partnerships is super important. And next slide. So in 30 seconds, I will attempt to run through some recommendations for the commission to consider. One is an adoption of the International Association of Chiefs of Police model policy on investigating sexual assaults. And really what this has to do with is ensuring that trauma-informed investigations are a priority and a standard and a best practice, and really looking at how those can be done in culturally specific and culturally appropriate ways as well, because that adds on a level of complexity. Looking at sexual assault victim disclosures and investigations similar to the policies that we have around officer-involved shootings can be very helpful. Thinking about not always trying to get a report or a full investigation completed within the first interaction, but allowing sometimes up to 2 sleep cycles for the victim to be able to rest, let the mind, body, and the brain process the trauma and be able to speak in a more coherent way. That prevents confusion and allows for clearer investigations and decreases the possibility that misinformation is being gathered. And then another piece of this is using translators with non-English speaking victims instead of children, and just following these types of best practices allows us to make improvements to this process. Excuse me, Michael, we can go to the next slide. Another recommendation is to start by believing. While that sounds really simple, if we can switch our mindset sometimes as a community, as a society, as partners in this work, and really look at treating all victims with respect and dignity and not as criminals, that can take us a long way. That also prevents victim blaming myths and misconceptions. When we start with asking what happened to you, that's what we heard in the mental health conversation that we had yesterday. What happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you, or why did you do that, or why did you go there, why didn't you yell for help? Those are all questions that cause significant additional trauma to victims. They further perpetuate the myths and misconceptions around sexual assault, cause victims to shut down and not want to participate in the criminal justice process. So if we can switch that, start by believing, and treat them with that respect and dignity that they deserve and not as if they're a criminal, that can take us a long way. And just simply recognizing that they have experienced a traumatic incident and may or may not be immediately able to participate in the criminal investigation process. There is a Start by Believing campaign. The Office of Family Safety and the Family Safety Center has participated in this and spread it throughout our community, but it's something that we could do on a much greater level, and that would really help with more victims wanting to come forward and participate in this process, and they would feel safer in doing so if they knew that Nashville stood with them and started by believing. Next slide. And then finally, just demonstrating a commitment to addressing sexual assault by making it a policy priority, increasing the capacity for detectives to take on these cases so that they have the ability to do this work as the policies are intended and as the best practices are intended. When caseloads are too full, it increases burnout and leads to difficulty managing this type of traumatic work and adherence to best practices. There is a model policy as well on law enforcement, sexual misconduct, and prevention and accountability, and that allows for starting within, creating a culture that does not tolerate sexual assault or sexual harassment. And when that starts within, it becomes communicated externally so that, again, more victims know and the community is aware that this is something that everyone takes seriously, that all law enforcement officers take seriously, and that it won't be tolerated. And finally, just in closing, this is a statement from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. But a trauma-informed, victim-centered response not only facilitates a trusting relationship between law enforcement, victims, and the community, but it can help hold offenders accountable by increasing victim engagement in the criminal justice process. And that is the cornerstone for why we want to see policy improvements and changes and continue to grow the wonderful work that the Sex Crimes Unit is already doing. Okay, sorry that was really fast, but that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I want to thank all our panelists and Stephanie and Michael. I know that we are done with our allotted times. However, I would like to, if we are allowed to, take one or two questions from the audience. This will be available for you to look at. I hope that everyone looks at this information. It is very significant. It shows some wonderful things that are going on in Nashville, but it also shows some things that we can improve. So are there any questions?
It's fine that we go over.
Are there any questions? I don't even know how to tell if we did have them. But anyway, so I guess if there are no questions, I want to thank our panelists. Thanks to the mayor for allowing this to be one of the brown bag sessions. Of course, victims of crime are definitely, especially violent crimes, vulnerable populations that need to be handled with care. So thank everyone for being here today and participating. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the experts that spoke today. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Sharon.
Yes.
No, I was just saying thank you, Sharon, for moderating.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sharon.
Okay.